Chatechesis.
There you go, Chatechesis. I can nearly say that in my own deep voice now. My throat is a bit shot these past few days. I can hit those low notes as well now. Only for a short time. Hopefully that'll get better soon. Good morning. Welcome to Radio Maria Ireland. Thank you for your company. It's Wednesday, the 20th of October, and who stole October from us? Where did this month suddenly disappear to? I don't know. Amazing how the time flies. Yesterday was kind of an odd day, wasn't it? It was really warm, really mild. It was really strange because we were out and about doing a bit of filming for Frank Duff. Frank Duff's anniversary coming up on the 7th of November. So we went up to visit his grave. We went to visit Frank Duff's house. And it was so mild. It was kind of sort of T-shirt and shorts almost kind of a day. And today is not a bad mild day either as well, but on the rainy side too. So now, always good to have your company here on Radio Maria. Shout out to everybody there watching in on Facebook and YouTube too. Thanks for your company as well. And do like, share, follow, subscribe, and leave a comment on our social media. Always welcome, always delighted to know that you are here with us and sharing with us as well. Now, tomorrow, did I check tomorrow's date, or was that last week? No, have I? Oh yeah, I'm betwixt and between. Oh, it is Friday. I see Friday's down as the optional memorial of Pope St. John Paul II. So he has his own little Saints' Day there on the 22nd of October. But the news came through there a little while ago that Pope John Paul I now has had a miracle attributed to him, to his intercession, and it clears the way for his beatification. I remember speaking with Bishop McGee, the bishop who ordained me, Bishop of Cloyne, long since retired now, and he was personal secretary to Pope Paul Pope Paul VI, excuse me, for a time. Pope John Paul I and Pope John Paul II, and he certainly maintained that each of those three men were worthy of canonization. And many years ago now, he was called to testify and give his verbal witness as to their holiness by way of a tribunal. The church sets up, it's a legal process, sets up a tribunal, and you sit and you're interviewed and asked all these searching questions in relation to the candidate for canonization, and particularly in relation to what might otherwise be considered their weaknesses or their faults, their temper, for instance, how they moderated the passions. We saw of that and heard of that in St. Paul's letter to the Romans this morning. We'll touch on that a little bit more later. There's none of us without, we're all human, we're flesh and blood, so you can be sure any cause for canonization, they're looking to see how did these men or women, or the candidate indeed, manage through the vicissitudes of life. Did they exercise patience? Were they clearly living an heroically virtuous life, even in the midst of human weakness? And that's the kind of questions to be asked at a tribunal. At any rate, Pope John Paul I, his cause has been in train for some time. So Pope Francis, just a week ago now, received in audience the prefect for the Congregation for the Causes of Saints and authorized his dicastery to promulgate the decree recognizing a miracle attributed to the intercession of Albino Luciani, or Pope John Paul I. The website says it's about the healing of an 11-year-old girl at the end of her life with severe acute inflammatory encephalopathy. Pronouncing that totally wrong, or encephalopathy. I think that's to do with the brain, is it not? You hear of encephalitis, I think it's something to do with the brain. A malignant refractory epileptic illness and septic shock. That doesn't sound like a happy diagnosis. Epilepsy, of course, again, of the mind. Her situation was very serious, characterized by numerous daily seizures and a septic state of bronchopneumonia. So obviously the lungs were severely infected. The initiative to invoke the Pope had been taken by the parish priest of the parish under whose jurisdiction the hospital lay. So for Pope John Paul I, who hailed from the northern Italian region of Veneto, the way to beatification has been cleared, and Pope Francis will decide a date for the ceremony. Let me see now. It doesn't say where the little girl is from, does it? Anyway, Pope John Paul I was only Pope for 33 days. And this is one of the stories Bishop McGee mentions when he's recounting about those 3 popes that he served under. He said how Pope John Paul I, from his earliest days, he said, when taking his name, he said, I'll be known after my 2 predecessors, John the 23rd and Paul VI, both, of course, canonized saints. It would have been well known to him, I'm sure. And he'd take those 2 names, John and Paul. But he said, I'll be known as the first. And they said to him, well, you can't do that because you don't know there's going to be a second. And so he said, well, I'm doing it. More or less, I think. It was almost as if he had a premonition that his papacy was going to be short. So it seemed quite appropriate that Pope Karol Wojtyła would take Pope John Paul as his name and be the second. So he was born in 1912, Pope John Paul I, in the province of Belluno, and died in 1978. So he was 65. So you say to yourself, at 65 nowadays, you'd imagine, look at Pope Francis, is he 80? What is he now? Into his 80s. So he was Pope for, it says here, 34, I thought it was 33 days, one of the shortest pontificates in history. Son of a socialist worker who had worked for a long time as an emigrant in Switzerland. In a letter written to Luciani, granting him permission to enter the seminary, his father wrote, I hope that when you become a priest, you will be on the side of the poor, because Christ was on their side. And they were words that Luciani would put into practice all his life. So you're not canonized just because you're elected pope, rather for a life of virtue, a life of heroic virtue. And no doubt he reached that state of being consecrated bishop and cardinal on account of his heroic virtue too. Many of these cardinals are quite saintly and holy men, and profound men, and men of amazing insight. Just dipping into cardinals as Sarah's books there, the cardinal from Conakry, isn't it, in Africa, Sierra Leone, extraordinary mind, extraordinary man, and going through great suffering in his life. This, you don't, reach those sort of positions in the church lightly. It usually means, again, they bring their human nature with them. We'll touch in on that, as I say. It's not everybody who, just because you're ordained doesn't mean you're canonizable material. Not in the least. We know that well. So he was a pastor who close to his people and spent a lot of time in the confessional. And during the years when the question of contraception was being discussed, in 1968, of course, would have been that time Pope Paul VI wrote about that in Humanae Vitae. He listened to many young families and repeatedly expressed himself in favour of an opening of the church on its use. But when Pope St. Paul now VI released his encyclical declaring the use of the contraceptive pill as morally illicit, the Bishop of Vittorio Veneto promoted the document, adhering to the Pontiff's Magisterium. So it was a matter of question and discussion in the early 60s, and it took quite a lot of consultation before Pope Paul VI issued that encyclical, and it received such resistance and such opposition that Paul VI never wrote another document after that, and he lived on into the 70s, But it was really a turning point, or a litmus test for many as to adhering to the Church's teaching. And it's a topic for a much, much wider discussion. We've discussed it at great length here, certainly, as well. And the idea certainly being not so much what's often depicted as the Church's ban on contraception, when it's in fact the very opposite. It's the Church's welcoming of life, an openness to life, and all that demands, because it does demand a great deal of couples. It's not saying that couples need to have as many children as God will send them. That's simply not the case. The church wouldn't be, that's not the mind of the church at all. But each couple has to discern according to their circumstances, but with the help and enlightened by grace, but also being open to the blessing of life. And that brings blessings to the couple and indeed to the family in its own ways. Again, we can come back to that again, but interesting to see that Pope John Paul I, before he was Pope indeed, was grappling with this teaching, and when the teaching was issued, then indeed he lived by it and sought to teach it and understand it. So he chose the word humilitas, humility, for his episcopal coat of arms when he was made Bishop and Patriarch of Venice in 1969, and a pastor who lived soberly, firm in what was essential in the faith, open from the social point of view, close to the poor and workers, and rigid when it came to the unscrupulous use of money to the detriment of the people, as he was demonstrated by his firmness on the occasion of an economic scandal in the diocese involving one of his priests. In his magisterium, he particularly insisted on the theme of mercy. So there's a far broader picture than just the 33 days or 34 days. That's when he was Pope. In Christmas 76, when the factories of the industrial centre of Margara were occupied, he pronounced words which are still very relevant today. Showing off luxury, wasting money, refusing to invest it, stashing it away abroad, does not only constitute insensitivity and egoism, it can become provocation and weigh on our heads what Pope Paul VI calls the wrath of the poor with unpredictable consequences. There you are. It's a striking sentence there. So obviously he had a great love for the poor there. He was a great communicator too, it tells me here, and he wrote a book which contains letters he wrote to the great personalities of the past with judgments on the present. A brave thing to do. And for him, catechesis was of particular importance, and the need for those who transmit the contents of the faith to be understood by all. Well, that'll be close to our heart here too, and I'm sure if Radio Maria was around, Radio Maria in Italy came to be in the 1980s, so sadly he died in 1978, didn't see it come to pass. I'm sure he would have been pleased with it too, in its own journey for catechesis and prayer. So, by combining his names, John and Paul, he not only offers a tribute to the great popes who wanted him as bishop and cardinal, but also marked a path of continuity in the application of the Second Vatican Council, and again veering away from nostalgic retreats into the past or uncontrolled leaps forward into the future. It's a difficult balance to strike. You know, do you go all liberal all of a sudden, or do you kind of close ranks and say, well, what we had before was good, let's hold on to that? It's a difficult path indeed. The Wednesday general audiences during his brief pontificate were catechetical meetings. He spoke without a written text, quoted poems from memory, invited a boy and an altar boy to approach him and talked to them. So obviously a very pastoral man in his own right, but he wasn't there long enough for us to appreciate and to get to know as well. So very good. See, there are several theories of alleged conspiracies of his sudden and unexpected death were posited to sell books and produce films, but you know, it wasn't the case. I wonder, this doesn't say here. No, that the final cause of death is not given in this little text here. But it certainly was the case that the nun who brought coffee to his room every morning, she found him lifeless. He simply passed away in his sleep. Great, so it's lovely. There's devotion to him, and many people, and even the bishops, it says, of Brazil asked for the opening of his sainthood cause, a long procedure that is now concluded. So let me see that miracle through the intercession of Pope John Paul I. So that establishes quite a litany of saints. Pope Pius XII, his cause is in train, but the historical and accurate historical accounting for his role during the war years, and certainly his great custody and friendship and support for the Jewish people, many Jewish people were safeguarded in Rome during the Nazi occupation, and that certainly stands to him. But controversy perhaps still surrounds his pontificate. Should he have spoken out more? And that's often the rejoinder to that, or at least the answer to that in part, at any rate, is that the Dutch bishops spoke out vehemently against the Nazi and fascist regime of the time and suffered the incredible wrath of persecution afterwards. Were all rounded up. Edith Stein, of course, one of those. All rounded up and summarily shipped off to the gulags and the labour camps and the concentration camps. And Holland was decimated, really. Catholics alongside of Jews suffered intensely. And so Pope Pius XII would have seen that taking place, that where the bishop had spoken out strongly against the evil of that day, it invoked the ire and a backlash that brought great suffering on the people. So it's how to balance. This is what diplomacy is about. How do you balance that conversation? And that, if you are a world leader with religious and moral authority, how far do you go before do you create danger for people by speaking out too boldly? And if you don't speak out, are you seen to be condoning the situation? It's a very difficult situation. So those two facts, at any rate, help to vindicate those who would question some of Pope Pius XII's actions and leadership during the Second World War years, that of all the Jews saved in Rome, and then the terrible evil that followed in Holland after the bishops did speak out strongly. A difficult one, very, very difficult. But we can see how the Lord is working through the great popes of the last century. Pope St. Pius X, Pius XI I know very little about now, I must say. Pius XII, certainly a very holy man. I think his cause has certainly been examined, or certainly the history of it has been examined. Pope Paul VI, Saint Paul VI, please God, was St. John the 23rd first, St. Paul VI, please God, then was Blessed John Paul I, Saint John Paul II. So if ever the Lord was blessing us with such holy leaders in the church and ratifying and confirming us in our faith, great leaders of our time in just the terrible circumstances that the world has been afflicted with, certainly in the last century, and the many challenges facing us in this century, which are all the more complex, and yet all the more distressing. That the war is continuing, but not in battle lines or battle fronts with soldiers necessarily. That's going on in some countries, but a very different kind of war, a war for humanity, almost for souls. Again, the war on the unborn, the war on morality. It seems now as if, again, the idea of an objective morality and truth is being challenged and undermined. So much so, insofar as we abandon God, if we push the Lord to one side, we lose our moral compass, we lose our framework. If Christ is not the direction in which we look to all moral teaching, where are we going to look? What moral values will we attach to anything? And is it all a question of just opinion? That whatever I believe to be right, well, that's right, and you can believe whatever you want to believe, and then what are you left with? A mishmash of so many different opinions. We might agree on some things, but disagree on a whole bunch of others. And then how can you order the good of society? How can you order the good of the human person with that kind of loose morality, where it's kind of doesn't matter? It's a utilitarianism. It's whatever is useful, whatever works. Or as we were studying last night in the UCAT, individualism, that it's all about me and my world, and whatever I think is right and good and suitable, well, that's where I draw the line. and there's no outside barrier, outside sort of standard. Except that you have the state who will certainly impose their standards and their morality. And again, many of these laws are right and good because they're for the good of everybody. The rules of the road, the fact you have to pay taxes, you need a certain amount of education. All of these things are in place in our land and are ordered to the common good. But do we rebel against those things? Do we reject them? Do we say, well, hang on, I've got my own system here? And if we were all to do that, we'd be left with some form of anarchy. And then the opposite extreme might be a kind of totalitarianism. Some would argue that this seems to be the road we're on, with a dictatorship of ideology. That somebody somewhere has their own ideological vision. Communism is an ideology. And that if that's to be the way, then again, who decides? Who puts that in place? And how do you enforce it? And is it in accord with the truth of the human person? Not an easy task at all. Don't envy anyone with that kind of authority. Again, at the social level or the political level, that's an onerous task. But we, people of faith, we look upon all these things so differently because we have the light of the gospel to pour over these things. And we can study and examine these things on the question of life itself and conception and see what does the light of the gospel teach us. And the core and simple teachings are there, and they're self-evident for those who are open to hearing them and understanding them and living them, that life is precious, life is sacred, and right from the very first moment of existence until natural death. Very simple, but beautiful and absolute teaching. And so, no matter what stage or what state or where, or what the social or economic situation is, or the level of education, any of these things, every human life is sacred right from the very beginning. And if that's a truth that we can accept and believe in and live, then life becomes so much more bearable, especially as we seek, in the light of that dignity, to reach out to the poor, to support the weak and the vulnerable, and to be there for them in the fact that we have a duty of care to those who are weaker on account of the blessing and gift that is life. So you see how important these things are. Very important, really. Did I bring my phone with me now? I did, just to see that we have a piece of music lined up for you, because we'll continue on that line. I'll share with you a bit for Mission Sunday as well, the reflection from the lovely booklet given to us by Missio Ireland, the Mission Month booklet. Some nice reflection there on St. Paul and his teaching this morning. But we might pause for a little piece of music and invite you to please come and interact with us. 089 467 2000 is that text and WhatsApp number, plus 353 89467 2000. Email us on info@radiomaria.ie, and please do give a call on the phone. Mary will answer the phone there for you today. 014 123 456, plus 353 123 456. And again, by all means, put pen to paper and write to us and share your thoughts with us. We're here at St. Anthony's Business Park, Ballymount Road, Dublin 22. Now here's a group we haven't heard from for a little while. A lovely group. I was only thinking the other day, we don't feature them often enough. A group from Derry, I Am, they are called, I Am. And it's a beautiful track called Butterfly. So do enjoy this, and we'll be back after our musical break.
A life ever-changing, I cast and I shed. To dust I will return. I am more than my body. When I die to myself, I transcend through your love. Just when I thought it was over, you raised me up to great heights. To the same, you and I. Let us soar through the sky, magnificent in color, for all the world to see your beauty within me. Up here I see much clearer now, no longer feel the pain. I'm home where I belong. As it was in the beginning, so shall it be now throughout eternity. Just when I thought it was over, you raised me up to great heights, to dance and soar in winds on high, like a butterfly. Let us fly, butterfly. We are the same, you and I. Let us soar through the sky, magnificent in color, for all the world to see your beauty within me. A life ever changing, I cast and I shed, to dust I will return.
You're listening to Radio Maria, your Catholic radio station.
They're gonna use it. Watch them use it. Stop.
You can tell it was with an amateur attempt at a jingle there. That was the Knit Ministries there. A couple of years ago came in to see us and recorded that too. It's a beautiful piece of music, isn't it? I Am is the name of that group from Derry. And they came to the studio as well back at the time of the World Meeting of Families and shared their music with us. We haven't heard from them since. I wonder if they've produced another CD or any further music since. That particular album is Fight the Good Fight, and well worth getting a copy of that. Some lovely music on that too. So now thanks for your company here. Thanks for joining with us and sharing with us and being part of Radio Maria here this morning. So lovely good. Bernadette rang in there. The Book of Revelation speaks about a mark on the forehead. What mark is that? Can you explain a little bit more about it? A shout out to Angela and Mary on Facebook as well. Thanks for sending in your little messages there to us as well. Yeah, the Book of Revelation is an apocalyptic book, and we can't necessarily take it exactly literally. There's all kinds of theories of what the mark of the beast might likely be in the end times. There's a lot of drama and a lot of speculation in relation to that, and there's been people who've been suggesting all kinds of things with 5G and with I don't know, graphene is another one I was reading about recently. They're suggesting that has something in it, nanoparticles, and sure, listen, if you were to pay attention to all of this stuff, you'd be worried sick. And my argument is, look, don't worry, do not be troubled about these things. I would suggest the mark to consider might be that of the spiritual life, and maybe sin as a vice as opposed to virtue. And if it's a mark on the forehead, maybe it is that by, the look on a person's face, or the wrinkles on the forehead, I don't know, I'm only speculating too. Can we tell that a person is not doing well? Simply by looking at their face, I presume you can. A certain amount you can tell. Is that what he has in mind? Perhaps. So do not worry about those who can harm the body. Isn't that what Scripture says? Fear those who can endanger the soul. So I'm not too worried or fussed or upset about marks or any of these things. There's enough signs around us today to, suggest that there are marks and things to be avoided by way of vice and sin. We don't need much prompting in that way. So because it's an apocalyptic book and it's written about end times, it's not actually a statement of what is to pass, what is to come. But we can see the symbolism of it. So I would see in it a symbolic value, yes, and to read those signs of the time. So if it's a mark on the forehead, it means that everybody can see it. Now maybe what John had in mind too in the book of Revelation was the opposite of what the Jews were accustomed to wearing, the phylactery. The phylactery is a little leather pouch. It can be worn on the wrist or on the forehead too, and kind of tied around the head. And the idea was, the Lord condemned the Pharisees for wearing longer tassels and broader phylacteries to draw the attention of people that they would get earthly praise. But the phylactery was a little leather pouch that would contain a scroll of Scripture, probably the text, Deuteronomy 4:6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And your neighbours yourself, you teach these things to your children. Talk about them as you pass by the way, and as you lie down and as you rise. The Shema, the lowly statement of faith in God and love for a neighbour. And so they would wear it to remind them, carry it around with them in the phylactery. Maybe the mark on the forehead, as John is thinking, is the opposite of a phylactery. Maybe whatever that might be. Again, he doesn't specify, we don't know, but it suggests that those who simply do not accept the Lord our God as a one Lord, and who do not love neighbour accordingly, there's a mark right there. So it doesn't have to be something physical, it's more than likely something spiritual, and not to read into these things too literally, but to try to understand the symbolism that's at work. So it's a great question, Bernadette, and it's good. I mean, if you, again, I'm not ruling out the idea of sort of graphene and nanoparticles and all these other things, but we keep a very open disposition towards these things and discern very carefully. Good. Wednesday the 20th of October now, a little reflection for World Mission Sunday, coming up next Sunday the 24th. And this is just reflections on the scriptures of the day. This one is by Bishop Paul Hinder, Franciscan. Have you ever been caught by surprise while doing something wrong? I am sure that it was a moment of shame and regret. Jesus wants us to prevent such experiences. He teaches his disciples that they should always act and behave with responsibility, knowing that one day they have to give account of how they live and what they do. That was the gospel there for this morning from St. Luke. To be ready, to stay awake, to be that servant attending to the master's duties. St. Paul then, in his letter to the Romans, reminds us also of this. Our bodies are instruments to be used according to the Lord's commandments, and not our uncontrolled passions. It is good to be reminded that we do not simply belong to ourselves, but to God. So I'm the steward, I suppose, of the gifts I've been given. It's not that I own anything per se. Everything is a gift. And so it's how I use these gifts then that will be the question for judgment when that time comes. Therefore we have to make a choice. Who do we want to follow? Do we want to be servants of God or slaves of our sinful passions? Now, our passions, again, in and of themselves, I just emphasize that again, if I may, are morally neutral. The body is good. That doesn't mean morally good. It's good in and of itself. It's the will that determines whether an action or an activity is good or evil. And the passions themselves are good. So the appetites for food, the appetite, I don't know, list them all off for the various senses, touch, taste, feel, smell, and hearing. These are all good. Even the sexual appetite is a good thing. It's not an evil thing. It's ordered to the good. It's ordered to life and to love. These are the two ends of the gift of human sexuality: the procreation and communion and unity. But always, like that and every other passion, to be used and directed in the context for which it was intended. So we understand clearly that the context for the begetting of new life and the use of human sexuality is that of marriage, where there's an openness to life, and that life has every chance of being nurtured well with mother and father. Outside of that, it becomes a dangerous force, an unruly capacity, can lead to great hurt and emotional damage. Now, the same is true of the passion for food. Again, if it's ill used, it can lead to serious health issues. And add all the other passions to that too, the question of anger. There's a righteous anger and an indignation, I suppose, that if it's channeled correctly, can be ordered indeed to address the great injustices of the world. Poverty, for instance, if people are passionate about eradicating poverty, or passionate again about nurturing and caring for the environment, that's a right use of that kind of passionateness ordered to the good. Whereas anger, as we know, the clenched fist and the angry word, does such wholesale damage, it burns the house down. And so on, again, with all the passions. So, in fact, Bishop Paul continues here. Where's it gone? There it is. Our body can be used or misused accordingly. The scripture readings of this day encourage us not to give in to evil things, but to act with our whole being to what is good and upbuilding. Again, directing the passions to what they're intended for, towards the good and towards the truth. And again, here's where the truth is very important, and the objectivity of truth is so important to correctly inform and direct the will and thereby the passions too. Am I asking myself if I am ready to pass this day of my life as a day that belongs to God? Am I about to invest my body, my whole being for God, and to live on the side of Jesus? Great drink there, thank you. Again, like the Shema, loving the Lord our God with our whole heart, our whole mind, our whole self. That's every day, that's a challenge. Have I the courage not to follow the pattern of this world, but to discern what is the will of God, what is good and pleasing and perfect? That's from Romans as well. And that's a daily task, once again, what is good and pleasing and perfect for me in the context of my life now at this time? Or am I inclined to indulge the passions, at a whim? How am I doing in the area of self-control? Food is always a good test. Maybe nowadays, video, these TV and smartphones, what else might distract us? All kinds of dead ends by way of wallowing in the affairs of others, maybe. These things can become a preoccupation, and not a healthy one at times. It will make our lives more joyful and our brothers and sisters around us happier to discern what is the will of God, what is good and pleasing and perfect. Again, if we're seeking the Lord's will, it means we're going to be seeking the good of others, and that builds and fosters community and strengthens family. It is also the best way to stand ready, because the Son of Man is coming at an hour we do not expect. Notice that we're, insofar as our capacity allows us, attending to, the needs of the Lord. That makes sense, really, doesn't it? And you see, this is where the light of faith helps us on that path of discernment. This is where, animated by faith, informed by the Gospels, directed by the teaching of the Church, and then allowing prayer, as it were, to filter into all of that and into the mind and heart, opening the mind and heart to the things of God, then we can begin to discern in a more peaceful way what is the next good step. And very often we might be faced with quite intractable and difficult problems that just seem just beyond our capacity. There's a number of prayer intentions which have come to us of late. Very difficult family situations where there's a need for reconciliation, there's a need for acceptance of apology, there's a need for openness and dialogue and peace. There's maybe one or other family member dug in and entrenched in a certain way, or living a certain way of life, and there's no easy and immediate solution presenting itself. It's just how this situation happens to be. So part then of our path of discerning is, again, through being informed in faith and allowing prayer to guide us to being at peace within ourselves, and allowing grace maybe to flow through us. Not that we can change others around us, that's a foolish idea. We can certainly influence them to the good by the way we live, but you can't force somebody to change. They have to be open to that grace. So it is, but we can play our part. And so, by and large, I'm sure that's how many such difficult situations are approached. And with the help of grace, and we just simply take the next good step. What's the next good step just for today? And not allow the situation to overwhelm. Because God can and does resolve situations in a very short space of time. There can be an overnight moment of grace, transformation, whatever way the Lord can work, that does take place. So we simply persevere in faith and hope and charity. We persevere on that path of seeking to order our lives towards our eternal welfare, and that cannot but overflow to the good of others if we can seek to remain faithful. We mightn't get to see it. It might be hidden. It might be something that only the Lord knows about. We might not see even to the end whether or not it's made any difference. But the Lord sees, and I'm quite certain the Lord hears, and I'm quite certain that the Lord answers too. Our faith teaches us that nothing is ever wasted. See that nothing gets, the Lord doesn't waste any of our good endeavours and desires, I'm sure. So I'll leave it there. There's just a few thoughts. Please do share your thoughts with me as well. Don't leave me alone here. Maybe you've had some experiences on this journey of faith too, and having to struggle with certain seemingly intractable problems, but that grace has supplied nonetheless. Very good. I'll conclude here, and just to thank you so much for your company today. And do please stay with us. Do please enjoy the rest of our programming today. We'll continue, of course. We'll turn off the video now, but we'll continue on the radio. We'll pause now for our Angelus and our midday prayer.